Hello, and welcome everybody back to the RPG Limit Breaks podcast. As always, we have our two hosts, myself, and a new host today, which I'm very excited. I did not know if Bob would ever actually show up as one. Bob, how are you doing today?
I was offended you hadn't asked me earlier, quite honestly. Only kidding. Yeah, I'm good. I went out for dinner with my wife last night, and it's super cold here, so my legs all seized up, so I lost a lot of my appetite. On the upside, I had a lot of Indian food to bring home, so I'm still coasting on a wave of curry and samosas.
Sounds delicious. Are you a spicy curry fan, or do you like yours more mild?
This is a trick question, because I'm a fan of spicy curries, but since all of my medical issues, I can't eat them anymore. So
yes is the correct answer,
yes.
apparently. And of course, we have our, as always, we have one guest on the show, and this week we have TheCowness to talk all things Dragon Quest. Cowness, how are you doing today?
Hey, yeah, I'm doing pretty good. I've been pretty busy lately preparing for some stuff that's coming up, and that's not always a bad thing.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, very, very busy, exciting time for Dragon Quest speedrunning. So, kind of been, ever since this podcast was a thing, it's been, so there's been certain shows I've been looking forward to and kind of excited for. We had the multiple Final Fantasy episodes. I was like, we got to get the Kingdom Hearts episode. And I said, we got to get the Dragon Quest episode. So, with everything going on with DQRTA coming up, I said, it's a great time to finally get that Dragon Quest guest on. So, super, super excited to talk all things Dragon Quest. And I guess let's go ahead and let's get started with just kind of Dragon Quest as a series and as a speedrun. So why don't you go ahead and kind of go over a little bit of your history with speedrunning Dragon Quest as a whole, and how long you've been doing it, what you got started with, and all of those details.
Yeah, so my history with Dragon Quest goes all the way back to the NES, playing the original Dragon Warrior 1 on console. My mom would play it, and then, I was like 4 years old, so I didn't know how to read anything, but I'd just do what she did when it was my turn to play, so fumbled my way through it. And it got more of the games as time went on, and then probably about 10 years ago, really, that I started speedrunning the series, because I think I saw Darkwing Duck doing Dragon Warrior 3, and I started with that, and then a few months later, Ness Cardinality was doing Dragon Warrior 4, so I learned that one as well, and ran both of them for a while, and stuck with 4 ultimately. I've run quite a few games in the series since then. Almost every version of 1 through 4.
Oh, geez. And they're all like wildly different as well. I know that especially like DQ1, I think every single version of that run is completely different depending on version, for whether you're doing RNG manipulation and whatnot. And heck, even like randomizer and stuff, I know it's a big deal for DQ1 as well. I don't know if you've dabbled in that, but that also completely changes how you would play and approach that game. So very impressive.
Randomizer, I played like around when it came out, about the first year or two it was around. I haven't really touched it since then, but yeah. Like you were saying, the series, it's interesting because how consistent the series is. Each game kind of offers something different from a casual and speedrun perspective. Like, for example, I know on your last podcast, you were talking about Like a Dragon, and it was mentioned that the damage formula in Like a Dragon and Infinite Wealth is taken from the Dragon Quest series. He wasn't talking about a specific game. It's every game in the series. If you attack something, the damage is going to be about your attack power minus half their defense power.
Oh, really? So, like, even because I know that there were a lot of changes, I think, like, starting with, like, I think almost like DQ8 with level 5 taking over for at least that one. I'm surprised, given that, like, the oh my gosh, what's the name of the mechanic where it's like
tension?
Tension, yeah, like adding tension and stuff. I'm surprised they wouldn't like kind of modify the damage formula. So it's been very consistent over the course of the series then.
Yeah, like some parts of it have changed, like the randomness changes. Dragon Warrior 1 has like a lot more randomness to your damage. Like at the end, they add like a 50% to 100% modifier. But then by Dragon Warrior 4, I think it's like 7/8 to 9/8 that it swings. But yeah, like the basic damage formula has been very simple the whole time through.
Wow, okay. That's really interesting, yeah. It's kind of one of those things where I talk, we do talk about like casual gaming, a little bit. And it's like, if you like Final Fantasy and someone says, oh, I love Final Fantasy 7, what should I play? The other Final Fantasy is like, well, yeah, kind of. The really cool thing about Dragon Quest in general, at least from a casual perspective, probably maybe less so from a speedrunning perspective, is that the games have a lot in common and a lot of shared DNA. And sure, I think 3 and a couple others have like the job system and everything else, but in general, when you like one Dragon Quest, you're going to like all of them, which is actually like a really neat kind of feature of the series in a way where,
Yeah, you know what you're going to sign up for, at least. Like you were saying, like with Final Fantasy, if you're a Final Fantasy 6 fan, you're still not going to know what you're getting with 16. They're so different. But,
you're almost Dragon not Quest, playing the same game anymore, are you?
You can't even say you're playing the same game if you're playing 7 and 7 Remake. So, yeah, it's definitely like a very fun and interesting thing. And that also leads to a lot of interesting things with the speedruns, I imagine, where, they are similar, but I'm sure they all have their mechanical differences. I mentioned like tension and 8, but I'm sure there's so many little things here and there with the job systems and everything else that I'm sure bouncing back and forth and keeping all that straight in your head is not necessarily the easiest thing to do.
Yeah, and like there's major differences like that. There's even minor differences, just like things like how the menus open and stuff. It can be difficult switching between games. Like the main menu items might move around in it. The equipped feature might be under a different sub menu. So the people who run, like sometimes in Japan, they'll even run like Dragon Quest 1 through 6 in one sitting. It's around a 24-hour run, and switching between all those different versions of those games, you got to have a short adjustment period at the beginning of each one.
Mm-hmm. It's kind of hard to overstate like the cultural zeitgeist of like Dragon Quest in Japan as well. It's always kind of Dragon Quest 3 on the Super Famicom is kind of their equivalent to like how every speedrunner in the early 2000s or 2010s used to have an SM64 16 star time. Every single Japanese speedrunner has a DQ3 time. It's hysterical.
Yeah, this is no longer the case, but it used to be that on the Nico Japanese leaderboards, that Dragon Quest 3 was the only game on there where you had to have as a certain good time to get on the board. You had to be under 4 hours. But I believe they've gotten rid of that since then, and there are hundreds of people on that board. Like, for example, just to demonstrate how much more popular DQ speedrunning is in Japan, the most popular, like the biggest Dragon Quest board that we have on SRC, I think is Dragon Warrior 1. Last I looked, it had like 20 to 30 people on it. Last time I looked at the Nico board for Dragon Quest 7, which is a 12+ hour run, it was 42 people.
Oh my goodness. Yeah.
So they're even running 7 over there.
I mean, I guess it makes sense. Like DQ3's release is kind of funny because it has like the same cultural zeitgeist in a way and like mental space that almost like a Star Wars release has here. Where like, they remember the day that game came out in the same way that we remember going to a theater and watching Star Wars or, the Lord of the Rings or anything like that. As like those like really big tentpole movies that just kind of stick around forever. So it's super, super cool to see all that. And the series never hit quite those heights in the West, but it definitely has a very, very passionate fan base, which is always, fantastic. And the games are all such high quality; it makes a lot of sense for sure. So yeah, let's dig a little bit into what makes Dragon Quest speedrunning, kind of unique and very interesting. So, obviously it's a very classic turn-based JRPG for a majority of them. Obviously, there's spin-offs that do their own things. A good friend of mine, GK, runs like Rocket Slime, which is a spin-off. There's like Heroes, which is a Dynasty Warrior, but we're going to focus mostly on like the traditional numbered games that you would look at. And what makes them so enjoyable to run? What's the really cool thing about these games when you kind of understand them and start digging into them on a deeper level?
Yeah, so like I was saying earlier, there's kind of like different games can offer different things, but like there's a lot of elements that you'd look for in a JRPG speedrun in all the Dragon Quest games. For example, if you look at Dragon Quest 3 Super Famicom, it has a good balance of two of the things I'd put as like subcategories under execution requirements, where there's, you have to be fast with your menuing because you press A and the menu opens immediately. You don't have a couple frames to think like you do on the NES games. So you kind of have to have muscle memory for where all your spells are, where your items are in every point of the run. But then there's also a lot of decision making you have to do. When you run into an encounter, you have to immediately decide what are you going to do to these monsters, and you've only got a couple frames to decide to start menuing your first character's action. And different games would have a different balance of that. Dragon Quest 2 Super Famicom is like the extreme of that decision handling, because in Dragon Quest 2, if you pick the wrong move, you're probably just going to die. It's a very punishing speedrun. But whereas Dragon Quest 3, I've heard it more described as like it's more important that you pick something quickly rather than having the 100% most accurate optimal option. It's very interesting how different those two speedruns are because they are two Super Famicom games that came out relatively close to each other.
Yeah, I've always, one of my favorite things to watch when you watch a really good RPG speedrunner is you watch their menuing and see the general speed. So it sounds like that's like almost what holds DQ3 on Super Famicom together, and why maybe it's such a beloved speedrun in Japan is just how much menuing skill, and just like not only are you making decisions quickly, but you're also having to input those very quickly. And it sounds like the menus are pretty responsive, but also very, very fast, which is also really, really fun and exciting. So.
Yeah, that's especially the case in kind of that middle era from all the Super Famicom games and all of the PlayStation games, which is DQ4 and DQ7 on PlayStation, and then it's 1, 2, 3, 5, 6 on Super Famicom. The games before that were just slower because they were NES games, and the games after that, with modern UI design, they tried to make it more aesthetically pleasing. Like the English Dragon Quest VIII, you open your item menu and it goes into this whole full screen graphical thing that's kind of obnoxious and very slow. If you've ever watched a PS2 speedrun, you've seen the runner like dragging fairy waters out of their bag into people's inventories, and it takes a minute to fill everyone up.
Yeah, it's one of those things that's like it's very pleasing visually and very nice casually, but definitely not ideal for the speedrun.
Yeah, when you're sitting there for 12 hours doing your speedrun, you kind of wish you had the Japanese menu.
Kind of give and take there for sure, because I know that the English version of the game also has like the beautiful orchestral soundtracks and everything the Japanese version didn't necessarily have. So
yeah,
let's talk a little bit about like so you run. Obviously, we're going to have you on at the actual limit break. We're going to be talking about the schedule a little bit later, but you have Dragon Warrior 4 as a 3-person relay. Let's talk a little bit about that. So why Dragon Warrior 4 in particular for you? What's been such a big key for you in keeping that as like the one that you've been running for so long?
Yeah, I've always had kind of a soft spot for the NES games. I've kind of talked about this in the interview I did last limit break, but when I was kind of middle school age, I was playing online Dragon Quest fan games and made a lot of friends doing that, and there's a lot of those people that I still talk to today, so that's kind of left an impression. I'm used to listening to the music and looking at the graphics, so definitely have some bias in favor of the NES games there. And then just with how long I stuck with it, it was the first game that like speedrun that I really sunk my teeth into. And between grinding runs and doing research and everything else, I've easily spent over 1,000 hours on the game. So very excited to finally show it off on the limit break stage.
Yeah, for sure. Gosh, 1,000. I mean, it makes total sense. It's funny because the game is so like a relatively long speedrun as well.
Yeah.
It's not easy to find time to, I'm sure, do runs or even practice on a game like that, especially because I don't know how, like, does the cartridge have even like multiple save slots? Do you, I'm sure probably emulators probably help a little bit with that, making it a little bit easier to practice and test and everything else. But, how do you prepare for something like this?
Yeah, like I've got obviously emulator save states all over the game that I can choose to hop in anywhere and either practice something or test something. I've written a lot of Lewis scripts to kind of test statistics and probabilities on all sorts of things in the game. So I can even use those save states for practicing things. But yeah, I don't do too much practice on console because there's 3 save slots on it, and I don't have a lot of save slots for it. But if I'm practicing on a console, I'm probably doing the full run.
Fair enough. Do you have like an adapter for your controller for the PC, or is it just I'll practice with the controller and then switch over to the Wishbone or whatever you prefer for your handheld controller?
Actually, the opposite. I've got adapters for the NES, so I can use about whatever controller I want on the NES.
Oh, wow. Okay. I guess that makes sense. Was it 8 hours? Get that nice, comfortable. What do you tend to use?
When I was grinding the game, I used to use a PlayStation 4 controller with an 8-bit-o Bluetooth adapter, because I was largely doing that because I have the Metal Slime Edition PlayStation 4, and it was the controller from that, but that controller I have since worn out, mostly playing Dragon Warrior 4, not PS4 games. But lately I've been using an SNES adapter and using an ASCII pad SNES controller.
Okay. Yeah, that sounds super, super interesting. Yeah. Just kind of keeping most comfortable, I assume, and just using. Is it like change anything when you're using different controllers, or is it just pretty normal?
For the NES games, I don't really feel like it's a big adaptation period to switch controllers. It's just 2 buttons and the directional pad, so it's much bigger deal for me for like right now I've been kind of struggling to find a good controller to use for the PlayStation runs like Dragon Warrior 7, because I really want a controller where I can switch X and O, because when I go to the Japanese games they're backwards, and I'd like it to be backwards on the Dragon Warrior 7 as well, so I don't have to adapt to that. So I've been trying out a couple of different controllers and adapters and trying to find something good.
Need to get everyone to have a universal standard, right?
It gets really funny sometimes when you play Japanese games on English consoles. I know that like I picked up like Valkyria Chronicles 3 on PSP, and the funny thing about that is it's a Japanese game, but the PSP and PS3 I know had a hardware setting where it would check what your region was and it would set confirm, like you could say like confirm or deny in the game settings, and it would show you, and you would use those buttons instead of what the actual like intended programs were based on those, which was always funny because I have a Japanese PS TV, so I would play games on that on occasion, and that would like reverse my controls, which is always very fun. So
yeah, I'm not sure why in the West they decided the X button should be confirm instead of cancel, and why they kept with that for so long. I want to say with the PS5 they finally standardized it one way or the other. I don't have a PS5, so I'm not sure about that. But I remember like the Metal Gear Solid games, you would play those and they'd be backwards because, you know, Kojima wouldn't let them flip it for the Western releases. It had to be his way.
Yeah, I don't know about that on, because I mean, it's still in the menus of the PS5. It's still X to confirm. I don't know what led to that decision either, because if they were just trying to match the Nintendo controller, A is usually confirm on like the SNES controller. Yeah, which is the right button. So I don't know why they decided to flip that. It's a very strange decision for sure.
You'd think though, like in logic sense in the real world, X as cancel makes sense, right?
Yeah.
But everything that I've learned in video games for 40 odd years, X is confirm. And when it's not,
well, you're putting the checkbox is what's going on.
Yeah, true.
So man.
I do also get that it's kind of a thing in Japan. Like anywhere in the US that you would see a checkbox being the opposite of an X, in Japan it would be a circle and an X. So that's where they get circle as confirm.
Right. Definitely like one of the weird little regional differences. And yeah, I'm sure like kind of remembering that and kind of going back and forth is always a little bit finicky too. Do you ever like start doing one run and then say, okay, I'm going to switch games now because, you know, this run died and this other run's a lot shorter, and then you start playing and then you accidentally like confirm or cancel something? Or is that?
Yeah, I do that a lot. Like in the upcoming DQRTA marathon, I'm going to have to play Dragon Warrior 7 in English, and then Dragon Quest Monsters PS1 Japanese, and the O and X are flipped between the two. So I'm going to struggle with that, I'm sure. Whichever one I practice the most, I'm going to mess up the other one.
Let's go in on Dragon Warrior 7 a little bit. I remember talking with High Spirits about this game way back. I'm going to date myself a little bit here at the first Limit Break. And, you know, we were kind of laughing with High Spirits, making fun of him because he had the long run in the event at the time, which was Lunar 2. You know, great run. Yeah. One of my favorite runs I've ever been at in a live marathon. But we were laughing. It's like, yeah, this is nothing. I do DQ8 or DQ7, which is, you know, 18 hours. And it's like, how do you even, like, I've run the long speedruns. I've almost never done anything even remotely that long. How do you prepare for that? How do you learn a run like that? How long are your notes? What's the deal with this game?
So part of the thing with Dragon Warrior 7 is when High Spirits ran the game, they weren't allowing turbo controllers, so he only had a couple 40-second breaks in the run where it would play a full FMV, and I have no idea how he made it through the game without more breaks than that. But you know, shortly before I picked up the game, we did a community survey: should we allow turbo controllers in all the Western games, and ultimately ended up allowing it for almost all the games in the series. If we had not changed that rule, I would have learned it in Japanese so that I could use the turbo controller, because there's a lot of like 3 to 5 minute conversations where you can just hold auto fire and get up and, you know, just take a stretch break, go to the bathroom, get something to drink, whatever you need to do. There's time to microwave food in the run now. It's a lot easier, but you are still more or less sitting in your chair staring at the screen for, you know, 16 to 20 hours, whatever your PB is. But at least you're not sitting there having to mash 3 buttons to get through all the text like High Spirits always had to do. And like regarding the long-term preparation, it took me like 3 months to learn the game, and my notes are like 1,000, like I think 10,000 words long. Maybe it was 10,000 characters, but I know if you print them out, it's like 72 pages. Just a big text document.
Wait, 72 pages.
Oh yeah, there's a lot of quest triggers in that game.
There are strategy guides that are shorter than 72 pages with like maps and everything.
Yeah, illustrations. Yeah.
Oh my god!
How much of that is ASCII art?
Maybe a little bit up at the top, but yeah, I didn't put too much of that in. There might be 1 or 2 puzzles that I tried to do some ASCII art for. But yeah, if anyone's not familiar with Dragon Warrior 7, it's just that long of a game. There's you start off on this remote island. There's no other islands in the world. It's just you and the ocean, and then you find this ruin, and there's all these pedestals, 18 of them. You put some shards in there that show a picture of an island, and then you get sucked into that island. And so each of those 18 islands has its own little story. In the speedrun, they all take 30 to 60 minutes to get through. Yeah, it's just, there's literally that much content in the game. And then that's just disc 1. It's a 2-disc PS1 RPG.
It's 2 discs with like, I remember it was almost controversial when that game came out because, it came out after Final Fantasy VII, and, Final Fantasy VII blew everyone's, mind when it came out with, the 3D graphics and the big cutscenes. And then like Dragon Warrior comes out, it looks like positively dated at that point. It looks like a Super Famicom game almost in a way, definitely better, couldn't run on that. But like, when you're comparing that to this high end, at the time, we always, FF7 looks like it's made out of Legos now, but
yeah.
That game is huge, and I remember hearing like the script for that game is just like a bookshelf worth of just pages. I'm amazed they localized it with like how much text is in that.
Yeah, there's a photograph of the script somewhere. Like it's sitting in a Japanese museum somewhere, and it's like a 3-shelf bookshelf just full of binders. And this is the script of Dragon Quest VII.
Unbelievable.
For the record, there's nothing wrong with Legos, okay?
I unironically would play Lego Final Fantasy VII. That sounds incredible.
Like, as a man who is sitting here within reach, like a Lego Star Trek tricorder, a Lego Star Trek hypo spray, like there is nothing wrong with Legos, okay? and I've 100%ed every Lego game except The Hobbit, which I will never play.
Is Lego The Hobbit?
There has been a Lego Hobbit, but they only made 2/3 of it because they wanted it to come out in time for the second movie.
Uh-huh.
Then they were intended to release the third movie as DLC, and then just didn't. So the game's just not finished. So I'll just never bother playing it.
All right, huh? Very. Yeah, they really
interesting fact for you.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah, we need to see the real crossovers. We get the Lego Dragon Quest or Final Fantasy. That's what we need.
Oh, Lego Final Fantasy VII. I would be all over that. As long as it's not this new Final Fantasy Rebirth nonsense, and it's actual Final Fantasy VII.
Another fun fact comparing DQ7 to FF7 is that I've read that the FMVs from both discs are on both discs, though it's not entirely clear why the game is 2 discs long, unless an executive just told them, this Final Fantasy game had 3 discs, you need at least 2. Because in a speedrun of, if you're doing like a 16-hour run, the last disc is only like 2.5 hours. It's a small percentage of the game. Oh yeah, there's the script. Like Ash is pulling it up, but yeah, that's actually a little larger than I realized. I remembered. It's a script of Dragon Quest VII.
I do like the mental image of like some developer at Enix just going, "Oh my god, this game is our competitor is 3 discs."
DQ7 and FF7. DQ7 is going to be twice as long.
Oh man, that is very funny. So yeah, DQRTA, that is 2 weeks from now, right?
Yeah, I believe 2 weeks from this coming Wednesday is when we start, the 10th through the 15th of April.
And there's a lot of bangers on this schedule. Really exciting stuff to see. We've had Dragon Quest VIII in the event, but we had the 3DS run. And I know there's a lot of people that have a very big fondness for the PS2 version over that. And it's a very different speedrun in a way because of all the changes that were made for the 3DS version. It's part of the reason the 3DS version is so much faster. But, you know, DQ8 is one of those games that people just really, really adore. I used to joke that, like, way back in the day, one of the fastest ways to become a Twitch partner would be to learn and do multiple DQ8 runs.
Yeah. Yeah, it's one of the few games that actually ever gave anyone views, like viewership over 3 digits.
So, I mean, there's that. There's you with DQ7, which is funny because that's just a day. There's just a day of the marathon that's just TheCowness doing Dragon Warrior 7, which is super, super cool. 18 hours, that is completely wild. There's, you know, Dragon Quest 1 through 3. There's some of the newer Dragon Quest. There's like, you know, some of the Switch ports and just so many cool speedruns on here. And I think almost every Dragon Warrior is represented by the time we're done with this, right? I think 1 through 3.
Yeah, the whole main series is in there, unless you count 10, but I don't think you count 10. It's the MMO, not released in the West.
Yeah, it's but people actually speedrun 10?
There's like the Dragon Quest 10 offline, which is kind of like
right.
It's still Japanese only, but some people have done runs of that.
Yeah, I forgot that actually did release. That's
yeah.
Does it play like the actual Dragon Quest, or they like actually make it like into a turn? Although like DQ10 is a very strange game in general because it is like an MMO, but like there's like turn-based elements to it as well. And
yeah, I'm not super familiar with the MMO version, but I've seen Hactical do some runs of DQ10, and it looks pretty similar to normal DQ games. I'm not sure if anyone else in the West has done any runs of it, but I know he had some Japanese runs he took notes off of.
Makes sense. Like I said, Japan loves its Dragon Quest, so I'm sure every single Dragon Quest has way more speedruns than you would expect. So,
yeah.
Are there any runs in there that you're particularly excited for, other than the ones you're involved with?
Yeah, there's quite a few that are like unique runs, like things we haven't had in the DQRTA marathon before. Like, looking at the list, the Dragon Quest 3 Famicom run, that's going to be a glitched run involving glitch involving the ship that I'm not actually familiar with, but Crimson's racing Abukine in it, 2 Japanese runners. That's about 3 hours long. Pop is doing a whole roto relay, so that's Super Famicom DQ 1, 2, 3. I think lately he's been practicing them, doing them in order, but I haven't. I should probably ask him what order he's going to do in the event. But that's going to be cool because he's not only the record holder in the roto relay itself. The Japanese Nico board has a board for that, but he's also, I believe, still the record holder for Dragon Quest 1 just in general, and 3rd place in Dragon Quest 2. So he's very good at all 3 of the games.
Wow, yeah, that's fantastic. And yeah, so good at all 3, but also like the best in the world at 1 and one of the best at 2. That's super cool. I'm assuming which one is Hot Plate? Is that DQ3?
What was the question? Sorry.
The Hot Plate run.
Oh yeah, that was DQ3 Famicom. Yeah, where it was like a minute long. You boot it up and have your Famicom at a certain temperature, so that when you reset, it does specific memory corruption based on the conductivity of the circuits inside your system.
What kind of person do you have to be to try and work that out? Because if I put my Famicom on a hot plate, and you just sit there going,
there's definitely some combination of software engineer and electrical engineer. I don't know.
Yeah, I still remember that. Like that went like super viral when that first happened in I want to say it was a JRTA marathon, and he had just the picture of this. I think he used a real Famicom that was sitting on top of a hot plate, and there was a thermometer next to it, so he knew what the temperature of the cartridge was. And it was just one of the most ridiculous things I think I've ever seen. And I'm just like, that poor console and cartridge.
Like seriously, sure. Putting the Famicom on the hot plate is one thing, right? Because you might just want to melt a Famicom. But then to go, what if it was turned on with a game in it?
Fortunately, Dragon Quest 1 carts are pretty cheap, especially the Famicom version, but still.
God, gosh.
Yeah, I think at some point I even saw like a 4-way race of that, like when it was still, when people were still talking about it on one of the Japanese channels.
Oh my gosh. It's like the perfect combination of like meme, but also super interesting when you start realizing the details of it. It's up there with like Stop and Swap in like the glitch where you beat Paper Mario with arbitrary code execution by using Ocarina of Time.
Yeah.
Oh, jeez. And filing down one of the
it really does. Like I can understand like playing in a game and being like, oh, what happens if I run into this wall or that wall, or like if I press this combination of buttons.
Right.
But I can't imagine going, what if while I'm in the middle of the Hojo fight in Midgar in Final Fantasy VII, if I took my original PlayStation 1, dunked it in a bucket of ice water, and turned it upside down while playing drumsticks on the top. Like, just that thought process boggles my mind.
Yeah. Kind of makes you wonder with some of these games that come out and there's just like some obvious glitch. Like, how did they playtest this? Like, what could you do to those games if you stuck your PS4 on a hot plate, started messing with it?
I always say, like, the reason people go like, oh, Ocarina of Time, you know, and like even like, you know, all these other games, they're so glitchy and so broken. They're probably not any more broken than any other game we've ever played. It's just we have so many more eyes on these games.
Yeah, they've been put under a microscope for so long. Like, you're not going to find any of those OOT glitches playing it casually.
Yeah, absolutely. That game feels very complete, you know. At worst, maybe you'll fall through a floor and laugh at it, you know. I've had that happen in a couple of games casually, but, you know, usually it's very, you know, it's normal to play through the game and not realize that underneath the hood, there's really a lot of very strange things happening.
Yep.
So, and again, you know, Dragon Quest is such a big cultural institution in Japan. You know, they don't release the games during weekdays because they're too afraid of the country shutting down when they release them. That they can't. You know, the joke is that the Japanese government asked, you know, Enix and Square to not release the games during the week because they literally, people take off work and skip school and do all this stuff to play Dragon Quest on the day it comes out. Which is
yeah. I've heard that a lot. I don't know if the government actually was involved, but if you look at the release dates of Dragon Quest 3 and Dragon Quest 4, I think 3 did come out on a Friday and 4 they waited for the weekend.
Yeah, it's one of those things that I think it's like at this point, it's almost like a, you know, just a cultural rumor that just took off, you know, like, oh, they must have started doing this because otherwise there's no way they would have done it. But I mean, it is one of those things that if you watch a lot of anime and they're trying to be like nostalgic, they'll show the release date of Dragon Quest 3 on the anime. And it's like, oh, this is the thing you remember that happened. You know the exact time frame this happened and, you know, what it meant and how big it was, you know, to literally every Japanese nerd that's ever, you know, that was alive at the time. So it's such a fascinating series. It really is. You know, between that, the way the game started, everything from that, the artwork, you know, being, you know, one of Akira Toriyama's greatest, you know, obviously that's been a big thing on everybody's mind the last couple of weeks, is kind of almost reminiscing on just how incredible all of Akira Toriyama's work was, you know, after he, you know, sadly passed away in, you know, early March. But man,
yeah, it's going to be interesting to see what the impact is on the series, and it might take a couple games till we start to see that, because, you know, he's probably already done all the character designs for Dragon Quest 12, but I'm interested, what's Dragon Quest 13 going to look like? Is it going to be somebody copying his style, most likely, because they're probably going to keep some of the classic enemies around, and but what is the like loss of that creative influence going to do to the new monsters that get added in?
Even just the protagonist designs, are we going to start seeing a completely different art style for the games where, you know, it is, I can't imagine they would go too far away, because again, those monster designs are iconic. Slime is not far off being Mickey Mouse levels of recognizable in Japan. You know, in the US, you know, we draw the little mouse ears. You could draw the little teardrop shape for Slime, and every Japanese person will go immediately, yep, that's the Slime from Dragon Quest. You know, no questions asked.
Or even just the smile off of it without drawing the slime shape, that's that recognizable. But Toriyama's art style is very iconic from both the Dragon Ball and Dragon Quest perspective. I think probably a lot of people who learn to draw anime styles learn to draw things Toriyama's style, and I'm sure they'll be able to find people that can come up with similar looking designs to his. But I've been kind of thinking of it like, if there's any Dream Theater fans watching, in 2010, they lost their drummer. He went off to do other projects, and they pulled in another very talented drummer. But I've felt like since then, the creative influence that he had brought was lost to the band. And so now that he's rejoining, I'm very interested in their next few albums. But I feel like it could be a similar thing with Dragon Quest, that maybe the next final boss looks, very different from previous Dragon Quest final bosses, because you've got a different creative work in there. And maybe it'll be positive, maybe it'll be negative. We'll have to see.
You think they'll go the Final Fantasy route and start changing the core gameplay loop?
Probably not, because Toriyama was just doing character and monster designs. They've still got Yuji Horii, who's been kind of the main influencer over the Dragon Quest design. But like he and Toriyama and Koichi Sugiyama, who passed a couple years ago, they were kind of the three people that have stuck around with Dragon Quest since the beginning. And now we've lost the character designer and the composer. So I'm curious what the art and music is going to look like going forward.
Yeah, it'll be very different for sure. Especially, the music in Dragon Quest also, very iconic. Not without its own controversies for sure, but if nothing else, I always recommend, if you listen to Dragon Quest music, this doesn't seem that interesting. There are like very high quality orchestral versions of all of them, because that's kind of what the composer was best known for and most used to. And a lot of these tracks sound completely different when you have a full orchestra playing them, and they go from being kind of okay to being like, wow, I wish it just could always sound like that. It's a really interesting dichotomy. I can't think of many other games that are quite like that in the same way.
Yeah, I just do hope that they do bring in another composer, because like I saw when Dragon Quest Monsters 3 came out, the second thing you see after Yuji Horii's name is composer Koichi Sugiyama, and you're like, I know he didn't do anything with this game, so they're recycling all the music from before. And I'm pretty sure all the music in that game was like the same recording that they used in a previous game, and it felt kind of lazy. So I really hope that they do try to bring some new music into the series.
Yeah, to be fair, I think a lot of the Dragon Quest spin-offs tend to reuse a lot of music just because, there's such an iconic style to how Dragon Quest music plays that, and I'm sure commissioning new music for that series is not cheap. So you could probably evoke a lot of similar, feelings, and those games are usually meant to kind of just be nostalgia, just personified anyway.
Yeah, like Dragon Quest Monsters 1, all the boss fights in that game, except for the final boss, were like bosses from earlier in the series, and when you encountered them, the room that they were in would play music from the game that boss is from, which was really cool. But, outside of that, there were still like 5 or 6 pieces of original music in the original Dragon Quest Monsters. And like, really, even in Dragon Quest 11, they were reusing a lot of music for really no reason. Like the sad songs from DQ5 would play in almost every scene, and DQ11 didn't seem to have any sad music of its own. So as much as I liked DQ11, I wanted to see more DQ11, not just, more DQ5. I've already got DQ5.
To be fair, DQ5 is one of those like super, super classic games. It's almost unfortunate it came out in Japan or in the US so late. We didn't get it until the DS, but
right.
But what is DQ5 at home?
It was kind of like for a long time until we got the DS version. It was kind of considered like one of those lost Japanese games that just like, this was the Final Fantasy 4 or 6 in Japan almost levels of like super famous, super influential, Japanese RPGs, and just it never came out here for whatever reason, which is strange because they localized 1 through 4 on the NES.
Yeah. And then they brought 7 over and still called it 7. Thankfully, they didn't do what Final Fantasy did and skip the numbers they skipped.
Yeah, that was a decision that they made for sure. Dragon Quest obviously is also a series, has a ton of spin-offs and different things, everything from a Monopoly clone with Fortune Street to a Waggle-controlled sword fighting with. Have you played any of the spin-offs? Are there any of them that have a particular fondness for you?
I've played most of them. I actually played DQ Swords a couple years ago. I did a blind race of it with Hactical. We do blind races of random games sometimes. That was an interesting afternoon. Like you mentioned, it's kind of like Dragon Quest Fruit Ninja. Monsters come at you and you slash at them with the Wii remote and to do damage. My favorite spin-offs would be the Dragon Quest Monsters games. I just like the callbacks in them. Like I mentioned, DQ Monsters 1 has all those bosses reused, and actually, since DQ 5 and 6 didn't come over till so late, there's a lot of music that I hear from DQ 5 and DQ 6 that I immediately think, oh, Dragon Quest Monsters used this, because that's where I first heard it.
Right, yeah. It's funny because I started playing Fortune Street with friends not too long ago, and I was hearing that, and it's like, man, every single one of these themes is like, I haven't even played that much Dragon Quest, and I recognize all the music in that game. So it's very similar in that. And yeah, as High Spirit's mentioning in the chat, there was also Kenshin Dragon Quest, which was swords before swords. It's actually a prize we had one year, which was very fun to see this literal plug-and-play TV dongle with a sword attached to it that you would apparently swing at your TV like a light gun way back in the day.
Yeah, I remember watching part of a speedrun of that.
Oh, jeez. That's gonna be up there with like the. It's one of those you got to have a face cam or webcam on for those types of games because they're it's just like silly to watch sometimes.
Yeah, for sure. Like that's fun with any motion capture thing, especially if it's a game with like 4 motion controls. Just watch what the streamer's trying to do, and so if you're just looking at the screen and it's not doing anything, then you don't know how much they're suffering over here.
Oh man. Yeah, for sure. And so we mentioned a little bit, but you do have Dragon Warrior 4 in RPG Limit Break. You've been submitting that for a long time, and I'm very excited to see that actually come to fruition. And that is a 3-person co-op relay, I believe, is the way that's actually going to be played out.
Yeah, and the way we're splitting it up is we're going to do 6 shifts total, where we split up the first 4 chapters and then split up Chapter 5, because Chapter 5 is really just a completely different game, so we all wanted a piece of that, and we wanted a piece of the earlier parts. For people not familiar with Dragon Quest VII, the story is split into 5 chapters, where the first 4 chapters introduce your team. Like, you name your hero in File Select, but you don't actually see your hero that you name until Chapter 5. The first 4 chapters introduce the other 7 characters. And then you get to Chapter 5 and you go and recruit all those characters one by one and pull your full team together and make a team of 4 out of them to fight all the bosses with. And then another thing about Chapter 5, though, is that on the NES version, you're controlling your hero, but the other characters are only controlled by vague tactics like, be offensive or don't use spells.
Oh.
Or there's one called Try Out where they'll just randomly wave items around from their inventory. And you can't take direct control over your party members. So a big part of the speedrun for Chapter 5 is getting your characters to do what you want by giving them the right tactic and putting them in the right situations. Like, don't give them items that you don't want them to use, that sort of thing. There's a lot of setup that goes into the fights before the fight starts so that the tactics actually make your characters do what you want.
That's wow, especially for the NES too, because I'm sure how complicated is the AI and giving them the directions, and I'm sure you probably understand everything there is to know about that by this point, but is it something you literally deterministically know if I set my AI to do this, they're going to do this? Is there a chance where there's RNG in the background? What's going on with all that?
Yeah, it's really not something that you could figure out just from observation. I think within the last year, maybe it was 2 years, Vaxxer did a dump of the code for the AI and kind of translated it and parsed it into a text document explaining the logic flow that the AI goes through. And it'll do things like, when it's determining if it should cast the sleep spell on a group of enemies, what it does is it looks at what it thinks that the resistance is to the sleep spell, which is bugged. So unfortunately, that doesn't actually work right. It always thinks that sleep is going to work. That's why Christo always has to beat on bosses. But it also looks at how much damage do I think these monsters deal each turn? How much damage am I mitigating by casting the spell and hitting all 3 enemies with it, since they're obviously 100% susceptible, except for that bug. And then what are my other options too? I could try to deal damage, and if that's going to kill a certain number of enemies, that'll mitigate a certain amount of damage. Or do I need to heal? Is this character in threat of dying? And it'll base it on the enemy's attack power and your defense power. Do I need to be healed? Can this boss kill me right now? There's a surprising amount of complicated, calculations going on for the AI, and it's really not, surprising that sometimes the battle just kind of freezes for a second while it thinks, because all that's going on in an NES game.
I'll say for an NES game, that's incredibly complicated. I mean, I always joke it's so wild to think just how little space there is on an NES cartridge.
Yeah.
My classic example is a screenshot of Super Mario Bros. Is larger than the game itself.
Yeah.
Which is just like a mind-blowing thing to think about. But, having this...
Dragon Warrior 4 is on a 512 kilobyte cartridge, I think. And, if you take a photograph with your phone, that's like a 40 megabyte photo. So, that's 80 Dragon Warrior 4s in that photo.
It is
the average phone is more powerful than the space shuttle they put person on the moon with.
Yeah.
Significantly more. It's mind-blowing stuff when you think about that, and there's all this really complicated things going on under the hood with that. So when you do the first 4 chapters, each of those is following a different character. I know, like the one that I remember is kind of infamous is the merchant, I believe.
Yeah. That's a very unique chapter, because your goal in that chapter is not to get strong and defeat a boss monster. You're just collecting gold the entire time. You need a bunch of money to buy a shop, and then you need a bunch of money to help fund a tunnel at the end of the chapter to get to the eastern continent. And then the chapter just ends when you walk through it. There's nothing you really need to kill, and in a speed run, we end that chapter typically at level 1, because you just buy a bunch of armor and nothing can really damage you at that point, other than, ironically, a metal slime can kill you with magic.
Oh my gosh. That is hilarious to think about, that,
Yeah, it certainly happens, because you'll run into a group of 2 of them, and together their spells could kill you. So you usually defend and hope that they run away from you, and then if you're down to like 5 HP, then you start running away. And
so each of these chapters then has like kind of different metrics. Are there parties in these at all, or is it you control these allies and then it's just the one character, almost like a DQ1 throwback in a way, where you have just the one character that you're making decisions for, and then you have the big party at the end?
So chapter 1 is like that. You start off as Ragnar the soldier, who's just like a Dragon Quest III soldier. He doesn't have any spells or anything. It's just attacking and items. You do recruit a monster to your team called Healy, and he will usually heal you. Sometimes he doesn't, but you don't have direct control over him, so he's pretty stressful, and I get to put up with that in our run because I'm doing chapter 1. But then the later chapters, you've got different party compositions. Chapter 2 is almost like a miniature Dragon Quest team. You've got Alina, the fighter, who plays kind of like Ragnar, and then you've got a healer, Christo, and then a wizard, Bray. So you've got kind of, elements of everything in that team. Then chapter 3 is Talon the merchant, who again kind of plays like Ragnar. So, there's actually in chapter 3 more things you can do with your money is recruit 2 people that are walking around one of the towns. There's a soldier type character and a guy that's kind of a mix of a wizard and a healer. I think he's at the heal spell and the fireball spell, but they're supposed to help you out going into that cave that where the strongest monsters in the chapter are, to grab a statue out of there to sell for like 20,000 gold. Then chapter 4, you just have 2 sisters that are one's a healer, one's a wizard, and then you can recruit another guy that's just more of a fighter type character. In chapter 4 you get all 8 of those main characters. However, you can only use 4 of them at a time. You've got a wagon with you, and you can swap in and out. Though in the speedrun, we pretty much just stick to 4 characters, but in a casual playthrough, like if you have your wagon with you and your team wipes, the other characters will jump out and replace them.
Okay.
And actually, Dragon Quest 5 and 6, you have your wagon with you for the final boss, and that's really cool how much swapping they do in the speedrun. I guess you have it at the final boss of 4 as well, and we do some swapping, but there's very heavy, just like, because in Dragon Quest 4, you can only remove one character, add one character at a time, but like watching a Dragon Quest 6 final boss fight, they'll completely redo their team. They'll have like one person out for this attack because they don't want it to, it's like a fire breath attack and they don't want it to hit 4 people. They hide everyone else in the wagon, and then for the next turn, they'll pull him in and throw out 4 completely different characters. And it's like every turn of the fight, they're completely changing up their setup.
And a lot of that is like it's just known at this point. The boss is going to do this like big AOE, and I don't want my big damage dealer to just all of a sudden go to 1 health or outright die.
Yeah, I think 5 started this where, like, if you're familiar with the Super Nintendo Final Fantasy games, the Dragon Quest bosses starting at that point have very similar patterns where there might be like 3 groups of abilities that they use, and then the first turn they go through in a set order, and then they jump to either B or C. Maybe B is completely random, and then they can jump back to A. Maybe C is a fixed order, and then it jumps back to A, something like that. And you have to know those patterns and react to them appropriately.
Yeah, makes a lot of sense. So let's say I'm in relatively new speedrunner. I want to learn how to do. Dragon Quest has been a series I've loved since I played the Dragon Warrior 1 way back on the NES back in the day. What would you recommend for someone that wants to start getting into speedrunning Dragon Quest? What's the best way of starting to do this?
Unless your favorite is 7, I would recommend just starting with your favorite. But 7's quite an ordeal to try to pick up. But there's depending on what you're looking for, I could recommend different games. Like I was talking about earlier, how some of them have more of a focus on like muscle memory and menuing things quickly, and some have more of a focus on reacting to the RNG the game gives you. So the Super Famicom games too are just a lot faster paced, but if you want something a little more casual, you might start with the NES games. Like NES Dragon Warrior 4 is really a pretty good entry point for something if you want a little more casual. If you want like RNG manips in your speedrun, Dragon Warrior 1, 2, and 3 all have full RNG manipulation routes. You can go with that.
I'm ssure, probably for Dragon Warrior 4 in particular, I imagine different chapter speedruns are probably a thing as a way to kind of ease yourself into doing it too, since each of them is independent of each other, I assume, right? Since you're not using the same characters. So that's
we don't have any. You don't have IL boards for the game at the moment, but you could definitely do just an entire chapter if you wanted to. You do start each of those chapters at level 1 with nothing carrying over except for the final chapter, where when you get your characters back, they'll have the same levels and same inventory. So chapter 5 IL would actually be very silly. I've done that before, where I start the chapter and everybody's level 99 except for the hero, and they've got all the best equipment that they could have picked up in their chapters.
Oh my gosh.
Doing that, I can beat the chapter in an hour 20 versus a normal speedrun, 3+ hours is a good time.
That sounds kind of hilarious. Is it just keep the main character from dying, or does the main character just die and you just beat the game with the party from there?
Yeah, kind of just either way, because if he dies, then he's not leveling up, because level ups take quite a while to scroll through on the NES versions, but also on the Famicom version, there are actually some skips in the game, so you can go through even faster, just not picking up all the characters. There's this glitch where the balloon that you get, which is your kind of airship for Dragon Quest IV, is actually hidden on the map. It's just invisible on coordinate 00. So if you sail over there and press A, you hop into an invisible balloon, and you can use that to skip a big chunk of the game.
I love silly things like that, where it's you would never know about this.
Yeah. There's the glitched any % route for Dragon Quest IV uses 4 different glitches that were patched for the English version, unfortunately. So when we do our English Dragon Warrior 4 runs, we call it true any % because there's really no game-breaking glitches that allow you to skip any of the story. So there's nothing we need to ban.
Makes a lot of sense. So usually around this time, by the way, we do open up if chat has any questions for TheCowness about Dragon Quest speedrunning or anything in general. Feel free to drop those, but we'll kind of give those some time to filter in so we can get those in and rolling.
But with Dragon Quest 8 on the PS2, one of the first games that my wife and I played together when I moved here to the States. So quite fun memories. That one. To this day, we will still look at each other and just go, "Yeah, Angus doesn't get it," and no one else knows what we're talking about.
Every time I think of Dragon Quest XI, I always think of there's the old clip with Dream Boom way back in the day where Yengus kills a boss with the entire party dead, and he's on 1 HP. Just one of the funniest clips of all time in any speedrun ever. Just a random attack with 1 HP, whole party dead, gets Wave of Ice and just Hail Marys an attack, and it was just enough to kill. It's oh, whoops.
Yeah. Yeah, there's those moments are always great in Dragon Quest, especially with Yengus being by far the slowest character on the team. I'm sure that relied on the boss actually, not killing him, doing an attack that wouldn't kill him.
So fun. I loved playing Dragon Quest 8.
It's a game I need to get to. It is. I will say one of the cool things about Dragon Quest 8, and one of the reasons so many people played it was way back in the day. It came with the demo for Final Fantasy 12, and obviously, in the Western spheres, the Final Fantasy series has always been kind of the big one, But that was an excuse for people to pick up a game in a game series they probably wouldn't have played otherwise, and that was one of the first games that really did a great job because it was in 3D of kind of showcasing Akira Toriyama's art, which gave another reason for people to be excited about the series. It's present in the other ones, but if you're looking at a 8-bit pixel art or even 16-bit, it's a lot harder to see the Toriyama in the games compared to what it is on that. So definitely one of the big. I imagine a lot of Western Dragon Quest players started with 8 and then worked their way backwards.
I guess I could.
Go ahead.
Oh. I was going to say something else I could mention briefly is if anyone's looking for a casual entry point into the series, 8 and 11 are both very great games. If you're just a general RPG enjoyer and haven't played a Dragon Quest before, I'd recommend either of those. Or if you wanted one of the core games where the series hit its stride, you could go for 4 or 5.
As a person who's only ever played them casually, they're very fun games to play.
Yeah, I usually hear for a casual entry point, it's 5 or 8 or 11 are usually really, really solid starting points for sure.
Yep.
All right, so we do have some questions. So we have from Twiggy Rules, apologies. How canon should DQM Dark Prince be considered?
0. Without going into spoilers, though, seriously, there's a point in the story where it's very clearly forking from what Dragon Quest IV does. So by the time you get to the end of it, it's an alternate reality. It's not actually Dragon Quest IV's reality, but there's certainly a lot of crossover and references in there.
I'm sure that's pretty fun for somebody. You've obviously spent probably as much time thinking about Dragon Warrior 4 as anyone else. So even if it is this kind of weird alternate reality, I'm sure it's a lot of fun to visit and kind of see all the different concepts in that world again. It's always exciting to do.
Yeah, I certainly spent a lot of time criticizing it when I was playing because I had a lot of opinions on it.
Fair enough. From Conan 3, does anyone speedrun the Dragon Quest IV PS1 port?
Yeah, it's probably equally popular in Japan between that and the Famicom version. There's a couple people who have done Western runs of it as well. Recently, I can't think of too many other than Hactical. I know he put a lot of time into it because recently, within the last few years, they actually got rid of the RNG manipulation category and merged it in with the no RNG manip. So if you don't want to deal with the metal slimes, you kind of have to learn how to do RNG manipulations on that, which is really rough. It's a lot of what we had to do for Dragon Warrior 3 back in the day. Your own console might have different manipulations from somebody else's console. So you might have to spend 20, 30 hours just walking out of indoor. Did you get a metal slime? If not, reset and do something else. Yeah, I've done some runs of it before, but I didn't take it super seriously. And it was a while ago.
Yeah, those are RNG manipulation, especially when it becomes hardware dependent, is always so difficult. It's really cool because it means that I always find that it means that you have this true understanding of what is happening under the hood, which is super, super fascinating and super cool. But sometimes you do really not want to bother with it.
Yeah, it's a lot of outside of, actually grinding the game, a lot of preparation. High Spirits in chat referencing the back of the Dragon Warrior 7 game booklet, which says Dragon Warrior 4 English is totally coming out in 2002, but unfortunately the localization company tanked before they were done with it, so we didn't actually get it in English.
Interesting. I feel maybe, I guess they probably were going to retranslate the script, and obviously, I imagine it's still a pretty large script to translate, not as big as Dragon Quest 7 was, but I forget if the PlayStation version had this, but I know on the later versions of Dragon Quest IV, they added party chat where when you're just standing around, you can hit the talk command instead of it saying, there's nobody to talk to. It'll be one of your characters in the party will chime in with some opinion about where you're at or what's going on.
And I remember that for the DS version, that was like 3/4 of the game script was just party chat. So they actually cut it from the DS release. But you can, if you buy the mobile version, they did put it in the mobile version.
Really? Wow. That's...
And in my opinion, I don't think it was worth the money to translate that. It doesn't add too much to the game for the effort that they would have had to put into that. But it's kind of cool getting some more like fluff for your characters.
So another question from that Windless. What Dragon Quest do you consider to have the most memorable music?
Music? I don't know. I'm a big fan of 3 and 4 soundtracks. Probably something in the like 3 to 5 range. But I like 4's soundtrack a lot. 3's got some good like its boss themes. Both the Baramos theme and the Zoma theme. I like both of those a lot. But I also like the Esterk and Necrosaro themes from 4 as well. The whole series has good boss music, honestly. And like you were mentioning earlier too, like orchestral mixes of all of those songs are great too. Sometimes the console version doesn't give them justice.
It's definitely true for sure. Like I said, if you haven't and you consider yourself to be a fan of Dragon Quest, I would highly recommend. I believe almost all of them should be on YouTube and or pretty easy to find. And it sounds like a completely different song. I don't know how better to describe it. That it's like it goes from being kind of not very well translated chip tune to being like what sounds like a movie soundtrack.
Yeah.
So definitely give that a chance if you haven't before. Question from Twiggy Rules. Favorite Dragon Quest monsters original monster?
Oh, like a monster that's not from the original series? Probably the Kotal monster, the kind of wing snake thing from Dragon Quest Monsters 1. It's been carried over into all the later Monsters games as well, but I always liked the design of that one.
Yeah, I should actually go play some of the Dragon Quest monsters. I know that they've had a lot of influence on games like Pokemon, SMT, which is obviously a series I have a pretty big fondness for, and I've heard fantastic things about Dragon Quest monsters as well. So,
yeah, I think that they're great games to play, and they're like better the more of the original series you've played before. Because like if you've played Dragon Quest 1 through 6, you'll recognize all the bosses in DQ Monsters 1, and then DQ Monsters 2 adds some monsters in from 7. And actually, it kind of goes both ways, because there's at least one monster in Monsters 1 that got added into Dragon Quest 7 later. So they pulled some of the monsters out of the Monsters series and put them into the main series.
Makes sense. Question from Puexel. Do you prefer Dragon Quest or Dragon Warrior for the series title?
That's definitely
you should hold this answer to ransom. Be like, I won't tell you unless you tell us what your favorite Final Fantasy is.
There's an idea. I was definitely more opinionated on that when they were making the change. I feel like I'm kind of indifferent these days. I find myself saying DQ just because I'm around a lot of people that say DQ. So
yeah.
Like I'll be talking about the NES games and still say DQ4. But
I still love
not a really strong opinion anymore.
Kind of the lore behind that. It's very funny because it's like this, like the reason they had to be Dragon Warrior instead of Dragon Quest in the West was there was this like it was like a board game, I want to say. I don't know if it's a board game or like almost like a D&D knockoff that was just like it was copyrighted and they could not use the name Dragon Quest. And it's like, oh well, we can. And I guess around 8 the license for that or the name expired and they said, okay, we're going to use Dragon Quest like proper as the name here, which is
I'm not sure what the exact relationship was between that Dragon Quest and D&D, but I know Wizards of the Coast was the holder of the copyright. And actually, RPG Limit Break on the backup list has Aiden Chronicles run by Hactical. That game is based on the Wizards of the Coast Dragon Quest.
Wait, really?
Yeah. So,
I did not know that. That is so interesting. Okay.
So sometimes he jokes about it being a Dragon Quest game.
Huh. That's kind of the snake eating its tail type of moment right there.
Yeah, because Hactical runs a lot of Dragon Quest games as well, and that was an N64 game he grew up with and started speedrunning a couple years ago.
Huh, okay. Yeah, I wonder what the negotiations for that were. 'Cause I imagine that's like Square Enix had to talk with Wizards of the Coast about that, and Dungeons and Dragons Dragon Quest game. So yeah, it was related.
It was a little like, as like surprise D&D's kind of my wheelhouse. I remember seeing like playing that, and it's just like bits of this seem familiar, but like that's so many vague fantasy tropes that are like spread across like everything, right? Like oh, there's halflings, those definitely aren't hobbits or whatever, you know, but like I had no idea it had anything to do with actual DQ Dragon Ball, sorry, but wow,
they don't have any relationship at all. They couldn't use the name Dragon Quest because of that existing. Very interesting stuff.
And I think ultimately they only switched over because the copyright expired.
Yeah, they switched, and it makes it easier to unify your marketing as well. You know, especially like the DQ logo is so iconic nowadays too. With in Japan, it's kind of annoying probably to commission a new logo and try to find the way to make it pop in American audiences. So it's a good change, but it's definitely it's so interesting seeing the history of all these series and all these games and how they developed over time. There had to have been some kind of negotiations. I wonder if they I don't think Square Enix and Wizards of the Coast have ever collaborated on anything. So I'm like wondering if
there's the Final Fantasy Universes Beyond Magic cards coming out.
Well, that's coming out in 2 years. Yeah, don't ignore the big pile of cards over here. I don't know.
I'm not saying I mentioned that on purpose or anything. Well, there's also the whole. There's been 2 whole Magic sets based around D&D now.
Yeah,
as well that are already out. So,
do you know this, Countess? Was it DQ in PAL regions, or was it just in TSC that needed the rebrand?
I do not know offhand. To my knowledge, it was Dragon Warrior everywhere outside of Japan. I'm not super familiar with the PAL region.
There's also the question if they even released them in PAL regions, because I know a lot of RPGs skipped PAL regions in general just because of whatever reason. Some of it might have been localization and needing multiple languages, and some of it might have just been they didn't think it would sell enough to be worth releasing, which is unfortunate for games like, I know Chrono Trigger is the really classic one that which
was very expensive for like a 15-year-old Bob living in the UK having to import like every decent RPG.
You guys got Terranigma. That's the one y'all got that we didn't.
Yeah, but like we also didn't get like 6 out of 7 Final Fantasies and like Breath of Fire and Dragon.
So I guess Countess, thank you so much. You've been a fantastic guest. If people are interested in Dragon Quest speedrunning, the Dragon Quest RTA Marathon will be on the Limit Break channel in 2 weekends. The schedule I will go ahead and repost in the chat if anybody hasn't seen it. It is super, super cool. We're very excited for that. That will definitely come back, check that out. So much good Dragon Quest for the future. Countess, if people are interested in Dragon Quest speedrunning, where should they go? What's the best place to start?
I'd say start at our Discord. You can find it from pretty much any of the speedrun.com pages for the entire Dragon Quest series. There should be a link there. We've got people in that Discord that have run pretty much all the games that there's an SRC board for. So if you got any questions or want to know where to start, you can hop in there and ask questions. And we've also got a Google Doc that compiles a lot of information for most of the games that you can get to from that Discord server.
Sounds great. And then obviously, you've been such a great guest. Where can people find you if they want to watch you do speedruns, or just kind of, what's the best place to find you?
My Twitch channel, which has been popping up down below, but just Twitch.com/TheCowness. Been doing a lot of speedrunning lately, preparing for these events coming up, DQ7 and DQ4 primarily. I just got through a long series of some casual RPG playthrough, so I'm kind of burnout on that, but that might be speedrunning for a minute. I just did it was Persona 5 followed by Dragon Quest Monsters 3 The Dark Prince, followed by Baldur's Gate, which I didn't stream, and then Yakuza Infinite Wealth. So I'm good on RPGs for a minute. I might find some other stuff to play casually.
I am feeling that with Final Fantasy VII Rebirth and Persona and Unicorn Overlord and all these other it's such a stacked start to the year for video games. It is
those
absolutely
4
wild.
RPGs combined were 400 or 500 hours total for those playthroughs, and on top of that I'm playing Gloomhaven with some friends online every Sunday night, so it's another RPG technically.
Are you using the actual Gloomhaven client, or are you using tabletop sim?
We're using the PC version because we're spread out all over the country.
Oh my god, that game is such a headache. Play individually.
Yeah, my brother has the physical Gloomhaven and Frosthaven, and I've been playing Frosthaven with him, and it's a very slow play.
Bob is up here oh, I know. How many times have you played this, Bob?
What, Gloomhaven?
Have you been a Gloomhaven fan? I don't know anything about this.
I love Gloomhaven's a great. It's it's a board game that's basically an RPG, and what you do in the board game affects what happens in the next mission and all that sort of stuff. But
it's kind of like a legacy game almost in a way.
Yeah, it's very much a legacy game. But it's one of these games. There's been this trend in board games recently towards what I call macro games, which are board games that just come with tons of stuff, tons of miniatures and pop-outs, and all of the boxes are the size of a server rack that you get for computers, and it takes longer to set the game up than it does to play it. And I miss the days of simple board games, man. Sorry, you got me off on a rant there.
I will anytime I can get Bob to go on a rant, I'm happy. I have no issues with that whatsoever. Bob, thank you for co-hosting this on relatively short notice. It's been an absolute pleasure.
Yeah, no, it's been my pleasure. I just kind of sat in the background and let you talk because I knew how excited you were about this one. And I just chained in with a comment every now and again. I'm glad you enjoyed it.
That is...
I hope to come back some point.
I would love to have you back on, and hopefully in the very near future. So if you're, coming in here, don't go anywhere. Come back.
I will say before we go offline, I do have to put my staff hat on for a moment. Remind everybody that volunteer applications are open at the moment. Being the volunteer director for Fun Limit Break, please go over to rpglimitbreak.com/volunteer and please apply to help us out. We are taking both remote and on-site volunteers. So if you're not attending, you can still help out with the donation station, social media, with moderating, remote hosting, if your availability fits.
And Bob, as the volunteer director, how would you feel if somebody has never volunteered with RPG Limit Break before? Should they volunteer to sign up to do it? Absolutely.
Do not be worried. We have very experienced staff that will help you through everything that you need. And I can say personally, it's a Ghost was like, and me. I can speak personally. I don't speed run. I don't. I am a peripheral member of the community. It's a great way for me to contribute to helping out an event that I love. I started doing it with GDQ back in the day. I've transferred it over to here at Limit Break, and you get to know people, you get to interact with folks, and more than anything, you get to help out make money for an awesome cause. And if you're worried about doing something wrong, there's extensive documentation. You have each department has access to what we call a role coordinator. It's a dedicated member of staff for helping out that specific department. And for the most part, it's super fun until the internet goes down in the middle of the run and we all try to figure out what happens. But even then, we'll be having a drink afterwards and enjoy it more.
It's a great way to connect and meet people in the community as well. And, again, the cause is just so incredible. I've had the pleasure of talking with multiple of the, heads at NAMI over the course of the many, many years I've been attending RPG Limit Break. They do just such incredible work, and we can't be happier to be supporting such a good cause. And it's a great way to help both the event and the cause and the community as a whole. So definitely go rpglimitbreak.com/volunteer. GK has posted it in the chat for us, but
and if I can just say on a personal note, It's been super fun being here this week. And I just want to say, as I always do when I end a cast like this, go out and be excellent to each other. Because people deserve to have good things happen to them.
You know, Bob, I wanted to have you end with that, but I also got to tell people to don't go too far away.
I'll do the whole spiel if you want.
I do want the whole spiel. If you're on here, I can't end a cast where Bob is on and not do the actual spiel. Come on. that is not how this works.
All right.
So, real quick, let me get the last little bits of my stuff going. So yeah, after this, probably starting around 2:00 Eastern time, I will be back live with the one, the only Ghost Kumo and Spike Vegeta. We're going to be talking about the entire game schedule from Limit Break 2024, going day by day. We'll have clips. We'll have just a great discussion about all of the super fun things happening at Limit Break as a whole. Should be such a good time. Super excited. You guys get to deal with a lot more of me, unfortunately. I'm very sorry about that. And yeah, it should be a lot of fun. I believe we will not have Limit Breaks podcast in 2 weeks because DQ RTA will be happening. We will see maybe about scheduling something for either next week or the week after DQ RTA and kind of move our schedule around to kind of accommodate. We love community events on the channel. You know, they're fantastic and super excited to have DQ RTA, but it will mean that the Limit Breaks podcast will be slightly moved around to accommodate it, which again is fantastic. Super happy about that. But yeah, in the meantime, Bob, could not close this out any other way than letting you take care of it from here.
Thank you for watching, everybody, both here live on Twitch and on Tube and in the VODs afterwards. From myself, from Ghoul, and from TheCowness, I'd like to leave you now. Words of the 16th President of the United States, Abraham Lincoln, by saying, guys, gals, non-binary pals, and all those beyond that spectrum, be excellent to each other. Party on, my friends.